Okay. Data controls. MAC, DAC, and non-discretionary. Everyone familiar with these terms already? We're going to delve into them each in turn a little bit. Mandatory access control. Hierarchical model. Again, top-down, has different levels of roles and responsibilities and authorizations. Often it's enforced by the operating system itself. Business owner or data owner can't modify that. So you need an administrator for it. You have labels that are checked for access based on the classification of that information which you've already performed. Each of the objects are supposed to have those labels associated with them. Why do we say it's difficult to implement? Because you need certain skills and training and knowledge to be able to do so. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a difficult system. It just means that your usual line of business owner isn't someone who's going to be administering it. Discretionary access control. Access control lists are the name of the game. If there were ever a question on this sort of thing on a test, that associated with that would probably be the correct answer. That's the sort of thing that they would look for. Who assigns determination over these things? The data owners. They're the ones who decide who makes what portion of the list. The operating system will enforce that list based on their identification of roles and rights and responsibilities. It's based on the identity. They're going to be assigned to the list themselves. They become a discrete entity on that list. Can be easily shared, and it's the most common. You'll see access control lists being used almost ubiquitously across IT, especially in Microsoft implementations. Non-discretionary doesn't come from the data owner. It still has permissions associated with it, but you need a sysadmin to implement it. Again, it won't be with the line of business manager. Make sense? Questions? Cool. All right. Often in your ACLs, you're going to pair up that identity, that entity, that person, that user, with their permissions. J. Huber, read, write, delete, move, transfer, and you'll have either those check marks in there, those X's in there, or not. Can also be done in the form of a matrix where it's a bunch of different users with a bunch of different systems and a bunch of different permissions in it. It's just an expansion of the ACL into further dimension. We like to picture it as a table. It's something that we intuitively grasp because we can draw those lines like that. Rule-based. Comes off the ACLs. It's set according to rules. Why firewalls? Why are firewalls mostly rule-based? Because it's easy to determine what kind of usage they're going to be implemented for. Whether that's according to port, whether that's according to traffic, whether it's according to protocol. We can base our firewall rule set on those things, right? And those need to be administered as well. You need somebody who's going to set those rules in advance and actually assign those permissions to those users based on the ACLs. Those segue into role-based, where instead of using that individual's identity, the role will allow you to quickly assign all of those permissions to that user. I know that Brent is going to work in accounting. So therefore, under the accounting systems, he will have read, write, delete. But under IT, he will only have read, or something to that effect. Why only one role per user? What if Brent is working in both accounting and he's doing some assignments for the HR department as well. Why not give him both roles? Why not give him both sets of permissions?
Might get access to too much.
Excellent. Remember we were talking about separation of duties, and we were talking about need to know and least privilege? Because your organization is using the roles to define the hierarchy, those permissions are going to encapsulate those same concepts of isolation of duties. If he has both, he becomes the fox watching the hen house. Instead of it being separated of, he needs somebody else to sign off on the checks, now he has that full train of authority. So even though he might have duties outside his normal scope or normal role, that has to be addressed on a case-by-case basis, or you need to find a procedure to walk around that. You don't want to put it into your access control motif. Content dependent. This is, again, something that you don't see in most organizations. You're going to do it according to the value of the data itself. And the data itself are going to drive the permissions that the users have. The data, as we talked about, changes. It either becomes more important, which is unusual, but that might happen as business operations ramp up. But often over time it becomes less valuable, and therefore access should change. The less valuable it becomes, the more people should have access to it. You want to, what are we saying when we say constrained user interface? What does that mean?
That basically they can only see what they have access to?
Good, good. And sometimes they might have access to something and don't necessarily see how it interacts with anything else either. It's not part of a tree. There's no address associated with it. It is the thing that you have access to, and that's it. It's in isolation. Good. And capability tables. Again, this is an intuitive way of us depicting what it is that we can what users have access to. It's easier for us to understand it that way than a bunch of text with just the assignments listed on them. Another way to isolate the data is by time, saying it's only going to be available between this time and this time. Why is that important? Why would that be useful? Don't we want people working overtime?
Not all people.
Good. Not all people, right? What is very useful in controlling certain accounts when it comes to time? What kind of accounts might you want to limit based on time?
Administrative.
Good. Excellent. Why? I almost hit your coffee, didn't I? Yeah. I'm going to aim for it now. Why administrative in particular?
Because if it's 2 in the morning, you may not want somebody logging in and making all the changes.
Good. Good. Things like system maintenance. You might want to have a scheduled downtime where only those super users can get in during that time so you can control that access. It's a lot easier to review logs of administrator access when it's a known discrete period of time than having to look over 24 hours worth of logs. You're smirking, Andy. Have you seen this?
I was laughing about the cup.
Oh, the cup. Okay, cool. I'm so aiming for it. You better hide it. Good. We talked earlier about IDS and IPS. The big point here, nowadays, that's really a very bizarre distinction. Most good IDSs will do something in some stage, even if it's just alerting somebody. It's very rare to find one that all it does is just log all activity. They do have to be, if not necessarily monitored, they have to have somebody who's assigned to them to respond once they do find something. You don't want to let them operate in stasis. Again, knowing that the distinction is somewhat arbitrary nowadays, the guide does break them down into different kinds, so let's go through those real quick. NIDS and HIDS are the two big distinguishers for intrusion detection systems. The problem with NIDS is that once you start encrypting traffic on the line, it's a lot harder to use it. Why? Because the NIDS itself can't read what that traffic is doing. That's what the encryption was for, was hiding the nature of the information. So what it may be able to do is check the quantity of traffic instead of the quality of traffic, and be able to see if there are differences between certain time frames. If it is looking at behavioral types of metrics. Host-based is just like it sounds, located on the box itself, and it's looking at activity on that system. The problem with that is it resides on the system and it actually takes up memory from the system. So that makes it a little more onerous as well. Has anyone ever implemented an antivirus program? It's not quite the same thing, but has anyone ever implemented an antivirus program that ended up acting like the virus you meant to prevent? It does things in the background without you having scheduled them, without you asking them to do it, sucking up your memory and taking your private information and sending it to an independent third party somewhere else. That's sometimes the kind of problems you can see with HIDs too, is that they end up diminishing the capacity in the same fashion that a malicious attacker would. So what can the IDS see? Different sorts of things. There's signature analysis where it's known viruses that have been put in the virus zoo, and we know what they look like, and this can actually go through and look at them and say, is that one, is that one, is that one? What's a zero-day exploit, and why is it no good for signature matching?
There's no signature for them.
Excellent. Good answer, Andy. Yes. What is it, though? Yes. I mean, why is there no signature for it?
It's because it's an exploit that's not known about yet. It's something that's new.
I just wrote it.
For it. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. It's brand new. That 13-year-old Canadian kid just wrote it, and signature doesn't exist yet. Anomaly detection. That is just like it sounds also. Is this behavior different than all the other behavior that's gone through this network segment in the past 300 days? Does it just look wrong? The problem with this one is you're asking the computer to do that. You're asking the system to do that. And they're not real good necessarily at seeing trends in behavior that is somewhat twonky. Our eyes are better for that. Stateful matching. More than just packet headers. Why? What is it we're looking for here? What is stateful matching looking for? I can see parts of a script, and I can say, this is what a virus does. It calls up a macro. It looks through my email addresses. It sends out 50 emails in a second. And I can say, this is the appearance of a virus. I'm going to flag that. So even though it doesn't have a signature that's necessarily a virus signature, it has elements that have belonged to other viruses before. Does that make sense? Same thing, statistical anomaly based. I know what my network should do. This is what I've established as a baseline. This is what I've established as attacks. And as soon as I go from baseline to attacks, that's when it alerts. It just looks at historical data. Protocol, anomaly based. How would that work? What are we looking at in terms of protocols? Am I getting traffic over one port that's asking for services that belong to another? Right? Is this something that's coming in one place and shouldn't be there? Traffic anomaly based. Massive. Have we seen a whole bunch of traffic right now? Have we seen a whole bunch of traffic to one host? Have we seen a complete decrease of traffic at all from this server? Just volumes. That's all we're talking about on that. Make sense? It's a lot to detect. I know I'm going faster. Slow me down if need be. All right. Intrusion response. Why is firewall rule sets number 1 up there? What does that mean? What's the firewall do? What's it supposed to do?
Keep the bad guys out.
Good. It's supposed to keep bad guys out. It's supposed to keep the traffic nice and clean, right? Good. If you're responding to an intrusion, what are you going to do to the firewall? Tweak it. Yeah. Absolutely. Change whatever rule set is allowing that bad traffic to come in, right? Good. ACL into routers. What does that mean? What are they talking about there? We talked about how access control lists are the permissions that users have, both individuals and systems have access to those things. If an attack is trying to take a permission that a user shouldn't have, or one that they do have that they don't necessarily have to have, you might want to, in your response to that intrusion, change your ACLs. You might want to stop that right there. You might want to say that user is not going to have that permission for this period of time during the response, or they're not going to have it from here on out. You might want to shut things down. You might want to say, you might want to give your IPS the ability to shut down user accounts. You might want to automate these things. Is that dangerous? Yeah, you can get a lot of false positives that keep people out. You've basically created a denial of service attack against your own organization. But it's a possibility. It's something that's possible. And then, of course, there's ways that just alert somebody. Has anyone ever carried the after-hours pager for the intrusion detection activity? Gail, you kind of sighed there. Have you ever had weekend duty for that? 6-ring response kind of thing? Yeah. Yeah, the systems need to let you know when something's going on. People need to be able to step in at that time. And they have to be good people, and they have to be trained people. Again, management, especially in the old days, not so much anymore, but too often like to say, well, you work in IT. You're in charge of the IDS now. Just having authority to review logs doesn't mean you know what to do with them. Just being able to know what a virus is doesn't mean you know how to respond to it. And, like antivirus, they need to be updated constantly. There's always new ones in the wild. There's always new ones being added to the catalog. Why are you protecting the thing that's supposed to be protecting you? If it's a security box, why do you need to keep it safe? What does that mean?
Someone can get in there, they can change everything.
Yeah. Are there viruses out there that automatically go after antivirus systems? That they go to those directories where those things are stored, the default files where they're stored, and delete those? Sure. Do they know ways around them? Absolutely. Do they know how to add themselves to the definitions list as something permitted? Yeah. With an IDS, there's very similar ways of using its own capabilities against it. A denial of service attack for an IDS is just too many false positives. It's not really an attack, but it takes the form of an attack by letting it detect way too much. If all it does is going off, you don't really know when it's important. What's the boy who cried wolf, right? After a while, people are going to stop listening. Who has ever responded to a car alarm going off? Yeah. Don't you call the police when you hear that? There's a car being stolen.